Well, hello. How are you doing? I hope you're staying well and safe during these extraordinary times. And it's just gone 9 o'clock here in Portstewart in Northern Ireland. And I'm going to continue this week with readings from my books. I'm really delighted that so many people are enjoying them. And at this stage, I'm up to chapter 9 of Breadboy, which is my teenage years. So this is tonight. I'm going to read chapter 9. I'll take a few breaks in the middle to say hello to people as people join in, and also have to say sincere apologies to animal lovers because this tells my early, pretty disastrous experience of looking after small pets. So anyway, this is all creatures, great and small. I didn't want to be, so I didn't. But I was raging again. Everyone in our street had a dog except us, and it wasn't fair. You had to have a dog to be a proper family. It was like having a granny. There were more dogs than soldiers on the streets of Belfast. A gang of wee mongrels ruled every street corner. Sometimes you could tell which street you were in without looking at the houses, just by recognising the pack of dogs that ran up and down. Assorted poodles, Labradors, Jack Russells, Alsatians, and their variegated offspring were omnipresent. The howling could be quite exasperating, especially when the whole estate barked for an hour after a bomb or a band parade. Some people bred dogs in their backyard for a hobby, but many dogs bred up an entry just for fun. Some dogs tried to breed with your leg at every opportunity. The dogs in our street weren't just animals, they were personalities. Everyone knew their names and all we became familiar with their individual characters. As a bread boy, I became intimately acquainted with every dog in the street. Wee Scotty, the Highland Terrier, whose mommy got a wheaten bannock and a plain loaf, was a yappy wee glipe, but would never bite you. Brandy, whose daddy got a Priscilla loaf because he was allergic, would have sex with your leg at the very slightest show of affection. Then there was Petra, the Labrador, the most well-loved personality in the Upper Shankill, who enjoyed being stroked by the whole street. Petra had a very kind face and loved to play football and lick you. She waited at the end of the road for all the children coming home from school at the same time every afternoon. I was amazed that she knew the difference between weekdays and weekends. Petra was very intelligent, and she was possibly more popular than Paisley. When Mrs. Piper was arguing with my father about politics, she always said, "Even the dogs in the street know," to indicate some point she was making was very obvious. Apparently, even the dogs in the street knew we were being sold out for United Ireland. Even the dogs in the street knew we were being sold down the river to Dublin. The poor dogs in the street must have been bored to death, always knowing the same old stuff. Maybe that's why they barked at the cars and pooped on the pavement so much, just to relieve the boredom. In my opinion, the dogs in the streets had no interest whatsoever in the Troubles. I was certain that Catholic dogs and Protestant dogs were just the same underneath their coats, just like us kids underneath our Catholic and Protestant school uniforms. I suspected that even the dogs in the street knew rightly that they would still get fed and bred no matter whether Northern Ireland was British or Irish. Then again, I did notice that dogs felt compelled to mark out their territory, the same as Protestants and Catholics. Dogs peed up the same lampposts we put flags on. I hoped for a day when all the dogs in Belfast would bark across the peace line like those cartoon dogs in 101 Dalmatians. They would agree, using canine language, to combine their power of the paws to dig a big tunnel under the peace walls so they could be free to run alongside the dogs on the other side. Of course, the dogs in the street presented certain unwelcome challenges to Breadboy delivery. If you walked into the Ormo mini shop with any whiff of dog's dirt on the sole of your Dr. Martens, Leslie was furious. All service was postponed until you'd completed an extensive decontamination process. Come here till I tell you, he would say. Watch where you're putting your cabs, young fella. This place has to be spotless. What we're selling goes in people's mouths, you know. It seemed particularly unfair to me that while I still had no dog, some people had more than one dog. Mr. Black had his two yappy greyhounds that he raced at Dunville Park, where you placed bets on the fastest dog. The Clarks had two Afghan hounds with long hair that bit me after I delivered two pan on the plane, in spite of the fact that Mrs. Clark said, "Never worry, love, they wouldn't touch you." I was envious that some families were allowed to have two of something that I was being completely denied. John Hume would undoubtedly have called this injustice. Reverend Lowe said that when you wanted something very badly that belonged to someone else, that you were coveting. This was another of the thou shalt nots that God had written on two big stones for Charlton Heston up a mountain in Sunday school. When the Reverend Lowe said in church that God wrote those commandments on tablets of stone, I giggled and got a firm dig in the side from my mother. I thought tablets were what you got in a prescription from the doctor if you were bad with your sinuses. I couldn't imagine even one, thou shalt not, fitting on a tablet. There were only 10 thou shalt nots up the mountain in the Bible, but I heard about dozens of extra commandments on the slopes of the Black Mountain. Thou shalt not smoke, thou shalt not drink, thou shalt not go to pubs, thou shalt not have a wee swing in Woodvale Park on a Sunday. The list was endless. As a wee good living fella, I tried to keep all the commandments, but I managed some thou shalt nots better than others. Unlike some people in my city, I had no problem with thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery was easy because I still didn't know how to do it. But I couldn't help myself from coveting Petra, the dog. My mother rigidly forbade dogs in our house. She said they were all dirty wee mutts and would make the place smell like a pigsty. I vaguely remembered our family getting a pup when I was very young, but it peed so much on the shag pile in the good room that it was sent away to live on a farm. I could never extract from my parents any more specific details on the exact location of the said farm. In spite of repeated attempts to persuade her to have another go, my mother was steadfast in her refusal to allow any canine paws anywhere near her carpets. This intransigence was reinforced when Mrs. White, who had a yappy wee black poodle called Curly, invited us in for a wee cup of tea and a ham sandwich one day. This act of kindness was intended to calm my mother's nerves after the Pros had blown up the police station on the Springfield Road a few minutes after she had driven past. As Mrs. White comforted her with the idea that someone up there must be looking after her and all, my mother discovered a curly black hair sticking out of her ham sandwich. "That's why there'll never be no bogging dogs in this house," she whispered pointedly when Mrs. White returned to the kitchen to boil the kettle to give our tea a wee warm. My father was more pro-canine than my mother, although he always described Mr. Black's greyhounds as nothing but running and shitting machines. After the day he observed Mr. Black permitting them to poop in Auntie Mabel's nasturtium borders. My brothers and I attempted to garner my father's support in pleading for a dog, but he routinely caved in under pressure when my mother retorted, "And who's going to be left to look after the wee crater as usual? Sure, don't I have enough to do, looking after my mother and father and the four of yous?" I suppose she had a point, but I was offended that she placed the looking after of me in the same category as looking after her mother, as I was convinced that I was much less demanding than my granny. I never once waved a poker in anger at my granda, and I would never hide a bottle of whiskey behind the domestos under the sink in the working kitchen. For months, there was no compromise. It was like politics in Northern Ireland. But eventually, we came to an accommodation. It was clear that a dog was completely out of the question, so I gradually lowered my sights to ownership of smaller animals. According to my mother, a cat was nearly as bad as a dog, and they didn't even love you back for all the trouble. Anyway, they were always getting squashed in the road. Sadly, a few cats fell victim to the entirely innocent Ormo mini shop when the diddly ding button wasn't working properly, and we approached the streets unseen and unheard in the dark on a Saturday morning. I had accepted the dog ban in our house when I was a child, but now I was all grown up, I was determined to take on responsibility of caring for another creature. I wanted to be like a vet in all creatures great and small, although I didn't want to stick my hand up a cow's bum. So next I tried to argue for other smaller furry creatures. There was a precedent here because for many years when I was a child, we had an overweight albino rabbit called Snowball who lived outside in a hutch. We fed Snowball dandelion leaves and horsetails until he nearly burst and finally died in the snow one winter. So I will take a wee break there and say hello. So who's with us this evening? Alan McLean, who's a regular, good to have you, my old friend, and Anne Riding, and Marty McCauley. Hello, Evelyn Brown. Hi, Jim Pooh. Hello from Aylesbury, says Norma Fleming. Well, it was sunny here earlier. Yes, I know what it's like. It was sunny here earlier too in Port Stewart. Hi, Marty McCauley. Hope the weather's good there. It's great in Southern California. Oh, I'd love the weather in Southern California to be here a little bit more often. Hi, Sadie Hannah. Here we are again. Hello, Aline Bonner. Great to have you here again. Hi, Maureen and Lynn and David. Hi, Nigel and John. And good evening, Neve. Yes, how are you? Hi, Heather. Heather Mearns, an old friend from the Ballygomartin Road. Hello, Boyd. Betty O'Riordan. Hi, Tony. Missed your live readings Thursday and Friday. Had a virtual birthday cake with my grandkids in New York. Oh, that sounds lovely, Betty. Hope you can catch up. I'm going to be putting them all on my YouTube channel eventually, so you'll be able to catch up. Oh, that reminds me, I've just released today, actually, I've released my book, Little House on the Peace Line. I've released it as an audiobook free on my YouTube channel. And if you'd like to listen to Little House on the Peace Line as an audiobook and you enjoy it, I've done it to support a charity in Uganda that I support. And and they're helping people who don't have any food during lockdown in the slums in Kampala. So if you go on my YouTube channel, you can listen to Little House on the Peace Line for free. And if you enjoy it, make a wee donation if you can to help the brilliant work they're doing there in Kampala. And finally, hello, hi Susan, lovely to have you, Susan Wilgar, and hi Anne Kirk, good evening. Michael McKinley Senior, lockdown with Tony, so it is. Yeah, that's true. Hello, Nigel, another Macaulay. And hi, Amy in the States. Hello, Dave, Anne, Davey, and Oren watching in Belfast, Calders. Hi, Bobby McGee and the lovely Leslie from up the country, who's down the stairs. And hello, Kenneth Glenville, another regular. So anyway, I'm going to keep going and tell you about my attempts to finally get a pet. A pet rat was a definite no-no because according to my mother, there's enough dirty vermin running around this city without bringing one into your own living room. Even cuddly hamsters were at first dismissed as completely out of the question because technically they too were rodents. Before I was born, my parents had a budgie called Peter that went blind like Mary Ingalls. My mother never really got over it, just like Ma Ingalls. Another budgie was ruled out because no bird could ever replace her wee Peter that had to be put down my gas because he couldn't see his seat no more. I accepted that if we could reach agreement on something very small to start with, then I might be able to work my way up to something bigger, and eventually I would be allowed a dog. It was like when Mrs. Piper said, if you give them papishes an inch, then eventually they'll want to take over the whole place. So I developed a clever strategy for securing a dog. I would start with the smallest, quietest, and easy to clean. I would begin with a goldfish, the cheapest life in the pet shop in Gresham Street. The pet shop was only a short black taxi ride away and opposite John Fraser's where we bought all our clothes. The goldfish hung in plastic bags outside the shop and you could buy 2 fish for only 50p, the same price as 2 unsliced wholemeal loaves. It was a real bargain, and if they died, at least you could flush them down the toilet and still afford to buy another two quite soon. I chose my moment very carefully, and one day at my granny's house, after successfully lighting her fire with sticks and Belfast telegraphs and a big white fire lighter, I sensed that my helpfulness would be rewarded. Ah, God love our Tony. He's all grown up now, but he still loves his wee granny, she announced during the milk tray advert in the middle of Coronation Street. Of course, I did love my granny, but at 20 stone and an even bigger personality, she was anything but wee. The Reverend Lowe described her as a formidable woman, which I think that meant he was scared of her. And this was quite something, because the Reverend Lowe wasn't scared of the paramilitaries, because he shooed them off the streets into the pubs when they were out rioting. Aye, he's a good wee boy most of the time, when he's not giving any of his old cheek, added my mother graciously. Will you let me get a goldfish then? I replied cunningly, with sad orphan eyes. Oh, go on, love, let the wee crater. Sure, he's awful good to his granny, and he knows how bad I am with my pains and my nerves and all, lobbied my doting grandmother. The matriarch had spoken, and I sensed a victory was at last within reach. Aye, all right then, assented my mother, but if you don't change its water, the wee crater will be swimming around in its own wee-wee, and you'll just be being cruel. I was permitted to go down the road and buy 2 goldfish from the pet shop in Gresham Street. This was to become the beginning of a long relationship with the pet shop owner. I carried home my first 2 goldfish very carefully in a plastic bag which didn't leak too much over the torn upholstery in the back of a black taxi. The wee girl sitting opposite me on her mummy's knee started to poke at the fish with the licorice stick from her sherbet dip, so I had to protect my new charges from the word go. When I disembarked from the taxi, I had to escape from 2 wee hoods outside the chemist when they threatened to throw my goldfish down a grating. I named the first 2 goldfish Starsky and Hutch, and when they died, I named the next 2 Morecambe and Wise. After the 2 Ronnies, Frida and Agnetha, Luke and Darth, and George and Mildred died, I concluded that either I did not have the required skills for keeping goldfish alive, or there was something dodgy in the tap water in West Belfast. However, once I had been given permission to look after one genus, I successfully used this precedent to move on to new and more exciting species. But unfortunately, I struggled to achieve a decent lifespan for any animal. Each newly acquired creature met a premature and tragic end. It was easy to progress from goldfish to a tank of tropical fish, but they needed an electric heater to keep them alive, which was 20 weeks at 69p from the Great Universal Club book. In weekly trips to the pet shop, financed by my Breadboy tips, I gradually built up a thriving community of tropical fish, surrounded by beautiful plastic plants rooted in blue and pink pebbles. When I added a plastic underwater diver, my tank started to look like Under the Ocean, where Jacques Cousteau went diving on BBC Two. I had angelfish and guppies and even an exotic red-tailed black shark, like in Jaws, but smaller and without the teeth. Sadly, tragedy was never too far away from my pets, and so one catastrophic day, when I returned home from school to feed my tropical fish their daily pinch of flaky food, I came upon a scene of utter carnage. There'd been a power cut all day long because the Provost had blown up the electricity substation for freedom. Without warmth from the electric heater, all of my poor fish perished at Belfast room temperature. There was no survivors, not even my beautiful red-tailed black shark. I was devastated and angry because now I had no living pets whatsoever again, and I still owed 12 weeks at 69p for the electric heater. I held the Provost personally responsible for this pet massacre. Were innocent angelfish the latest legitimate targets? Did they think guppies were Protestants? I knew I was a wee good living fella, and I was supposed to love my enemies and forgive them and all, but nobody else in Belfast took that seriously. As I flushed the whole community of tropical fish down the toilet with one sad pull of the chain, I said a prayer to God, who understood because he was on our side anyway, that the Provos would never get to United Ireland. This was not to be the final pet tragedy, and the body count of small animals was set to climb higher than dead drug dealers in an episode of The Sweeney. To make up for the loss of all my precious fish, I was allowed my first small golden hamster with a cage and sunflower seeds and a squeaky wheel from Gresham Street. He was called Benny, after the fat funny man that ran after girls in their bras, and he peed an awful lot on his sawdust. One Saturday morning after my bread round, I made the tragic mistake of taking Benny out of his cage to show him off to a group of girls in our street. Irene Maxwell's wee friend Sandra Hull, with the permanent parallel snatter tracks under her nose, said Benny was the cuddliest wee dote she'd ever seen in her life, so he was. She gave him a big hug, and broke his neck. Sandra was only 7, and it was clear she had no murderous intent. She simply treated Benny as if he was one of her troll dolls with the long hair. But the outcome for me was yet another fresh grave in the back garden. A small pet cemetery was developing under the holly bush. My next doomed pet didn't even get a decent burial. He was a gerbil from Gresham Street, called Brucey, after your man with the chin that got Anthea to do a twirl on a generation game. I made the fatal error of asking Titch McCracken to look after Brucey for just 1 week when I was away to Butlins. Little did I know that Titch's cousin from Ballymena, who thought Ulster Protestants were the lost tribe of Israel, was visiting him for the 12th with his pet snake, Rocky. Titch loved the Rocky movies and he wanted to look like Sylvester Stallone, in spite of the disadvantages of him being skinny and ginger. He loved to watch boxing and wrestling, and he claimed he was keen to find out who would win if Brucey and Rocky were matched in a fight. I was never given the full gory details, but suffice to say that neither Brucey nor Rocky survived. I heard later from Philip Ferris that it had been a brilliant scrap until Rocky choked on Brucey. This must have been a cruelly enjoyable experience for Philip, as it was one of the few occasions in his life that he'd refrained from describing something as ballocks. Instead, the slabber stuck out his chin and, in a very bad Bruce Forsyth impersonation, cried, "Knife to eat me, knife." By this stage, my family had noticed my exceptionally poor record in sustaining life, and they tried to dissuade me from further acquisitions. "Why does all your wee animals die?" asked my wee brother. "Och, love, don't be buying any more of them poor wee craters that'll only go and die on you," said my mother. "No son of mine is going to waste all his money on no more sick animals from that bloody pet shop," announced my father. "What are you going to murder next?" asked my big brother. Of course, I didn't listen. Yet my animal husbandry was creating more animal tragedies than the cartoon movie with squashed rabbits with bright eyes. But I was still determined to find a pet that lived. So, say hello to a few more people. Hi, Bobby McGee. Evening. Hello, Andy McCauley. Hi, Angela and Keith. Good evening. Good to have you along. Hello, Bernadette Saunders. How are you doing? Hi, Lorna McAlpin. Hope you're doing well there. And hi, Larry Cowan, amazing co-producer on the Paperboy movie. So I'm going to continue the story of what happened next with my attempt to have an animal that would survive. The pet shop owner now recognised me as one of his best customers. If all the animals I had purchased from his shop had lived, I would have had enough for a pet shop of my own by now. Following my disastrous flirtations with fish and rodents, I decided to set my sights on a new species. reptiles. I read in a fossil book from the Shankill Library that reptiles were descended from the dinosaurs, and I recalled my father arguing in the street with Mrs. Piper about this. She said there were no such things as dinosaurs because God created the earth in 7 days not that long ago. My atheist father offended her once again by challenging this certainty. Although I still hadn't forgiven Rocky, the murderous snake, I wondered if I should give a less violent reptile a go. One sunny Saturday afternoon, after a particularly happy bread round with no complaints, extra tips, and a jolly Leslie, I caught a black taxi down the road to Gresham Street in search of a tortoise. I named him Steve Austin, the $6 million tortoise. He cost me only £2.50, but he moved in very slow motion, just like when Steve was chasing baddies on his bionic leg. My wee brother had a Steve Austin doll with plastic bionic parts you could remove with my mother's eyebrow tweezers. He said it was class, but my big brother disapproved because he said removing Steve Austin's clothes to take his bionic bits out was homo. Unlike the Bionic Man, Steve Austin the tortoise declined to move very much at all in the first 24 hours in my care. From the minute we left Gresham Street, he kept his head resolutely in his shell. This was understandable on the journey home because black taxis tended to be quite noisy and smoky and were crammed with small children with snatters. But I became concerned when, back in the relative peace of our house, Steve Austin's head remained steadfastly in his shell. I decided to offer him a fresh lettuce leaf and a tomato, but to no avail. My wee brother offered to assist by poking Steve's shell with matchsticks, but I initially declined. However, after 5 hours of no movement, I decided that a little gentle poking with one of my mother's blunter knitting needles might be required. Again, this produced no discernible response. It seemed as if Steve Austin was either very shy or very scared. He certainly wasn't bionic. After another 24 hours of no movement whatsoever, I took Steve back to the pet shop in a shoebox from Tyler's with a limp leaf of lettuce and an untouched carrot. I want to bring this tortoise back, mister, I explained to the elderly pet shop owner. The old man always wore a brown shop coat and smelt of sawdust. I could tell by the raising of one bushy eyebrow that he recognised me from previous pet postmortems. Up until this point, I had always liked the pet shop owner, and I sometimes said a wee prayer for his merchandise when a bomb went off near Gresham Street. I was concerned that unlike the Wrangler jackets and John Fraser's just across the road, the poor wee pets would never make it to a smoke damage sale. What's the matter with it, son? He asked in a reasonably patient tone of voice. It doesn't work, I replied insensitively. Maybe you put the wrong batteries in it, he replied in a markedly less patient tone of voice. What? I responded, before realising that the pet shop man was practising what my English teacher called irony. What did you do with a wee critter this time, you wee hallion? He barked. Several puppies behind him yelped in unified disapproval. I didn't do nothing, mister. His head wouldn't come out when I got him home. Well, he was perfectly healthy when he left my shop, interjected the pet shop owner, noticeably a little too quickly. I knew my head was often full of sweetie mice, and my father regularly said I lived on cloud cuckoo land, but there was something in the defensiveness of this remark that created in me the suspicion that perhaps my pet-keeping skills were perfectly fine. Maybe I had just been buying terminally ill animals. The pet shop owner sniffed loudly and rubbed his nose so hard he left a light residue of sawdust above his upper lip. He refused to give me my money back or accept the tortoise corpse, but he did give me a £2.50 worth of plastic ornaments for goldfish bowls on the clear and frankly insulting condition that if he sold me another pet and it died immediately, he would report me to the cruelty. I left the shop, dejectedly clutching the shell-encased body of my latest victim. and with nothing but a yellow plastic anchor and a red plastic treasure chest in my care. But as I left the shop, I noticed on the stall on the pavement outside the front door a sign saying, "New terrapins, small and easy to keep." Beside this sign was a small plastic tray with an island in the middle and a plastic palm tree on top, with two tiny turtles swimming around, both with their heads out of their shells and very much alive. It looked like Tracy Island from Thunderbirds, but with pets instead of international rescue vehicles. This was irresistible. Terrapins were both exotic and easy to keep, which was very important to me now. These wee turtles provided both the underwater attraction of goldfish and the dinosaur connection of a tortoise. I resolved that terrapins would be my next pets. I was still smarting from my most recent experience with their near relative from the reptile family, but I was determined to sustain life. It was like trying to stop the troubles. I was never going to give up. No sooner had I buried Steve Austin in the rapidly expanding pet cemetery beneath the holly bush than I was planning my next attempt at successful pet ownership. The only problem was that due to the serious deterioration of my relationship with the owner of the pet shop in Gresham Street, I would have to identify an alternative vendor. After some inquiries at school, wee Thomas recommended Cobb's Pet Shop on the Crumlin Road, near the jail and the courthouse with the tunnel under the road to stop the prisoners escaping. Cobb's sold pets and garden tools and saddles. I could never work out who bought the saddles because I never saw anyone on horseback in Belfast, apart from children having a go on Mickey Marty's roundabout for 10p in Corn Market. Several weeks of lucrative bread delivery later, I had saved sufficient funds in my plastic Abbey National savings book to go to Cobb's and buy two tiny terrapins and the beautiful habitat of a plastic tray. The tray featured a plastic green palm tree and a small raised platform onto which the terrapins could climb if their water got too dirty because you hadn't cleaned it that week because you'd been given extra biology homework for giggling when the teacher went red while explaining about sperm tadpoles swimming up eggs. Once purchased and safely transported home on my knee in the back of the Ford Escort Respray, I continued my tradition of giving my endangered pets novel names from popular culture. Noel Edmonds, who was very funny and extremely clever on Swap Shop, had been teaching me the humour of the pun. So I named my two terrapins Amy Turtle and Dick Terrapin. Amy was named after the wee fat woman who cleaned the bedrooms and forgot her lines in Crossroads. And Dick was named after the highwayman in a book from the Shankill Library. Once my new pets were named, all I had to do now was to live. Please live, even for a little while. Sadly, within a few weeks, Amy Turtle joined Steve Austin beneath the holly bush. However, to everyone's surprise, Dick lived. Not only did he live, but he grew and grew. He had begun with the shell the size of a 50p piece, but he kept on growing until he was the size of one of the cake plates Auntie Mabel used for serving an apple sponge to the soldiers. At first, I had fed Dick the same fish flakes that goldfish ate, but very soon he graduated to gobbling little scraps of raw bacon and even small shards of cooked ham from my hand. My parents were amazed at the rapidity of Dick Terrapin's growth, and I wondered what I was doing so well. I had no idea, but one day I caught my big brother offering Dick a small ball of snot after picking his nose. I was disgusted and shouted at him, but I wondered if perhaps snot was the elixir of life that was helping Dick to thrive. My overgrown terrapin survived so long that I even had to relocate him to my vacant fish tank. Then I had to ask Thomas O'Hara to look after Dick when we went away for weekends or holidays. Thomas shared my enthusiasm for reptiles. But one day at school, Our shared interest led to a most embarrassing incident. Thomas and I were standing chatting in the playground the morning after I had cleaned out Dick Terrapin's tank in the bath. On these occasions, the normally restricted reptile happily enjoyed the brief freedom of the whole length of the bath. I would hold a piece of cooked ham to his nose and then pull it away as he went to take a bite, and he would chase it the whole length of the bath. What about your turtle, Tony? Thomas inquired naturally. Oh, I was playing with my Dick in the bath last night, and it was class. Just as I uttered these words, Timothy Longsley brushed past us. He then gathered considerable pace as he traversed the playground, looking back at me every few seconds and shaking his head. He ran up the steps towards the dinner hall very purposefully, as if he'd just discovered some exciting news. I assumed he'd just been picked to be captain of a glorious rugger team. But it all became clear after the break, when I arrived slightly late for chemistry. When I opened the door, Timothy was sitting back on a stool, smiling even more arrogantly than usual, as if he'd just come first in the class again. He pointed at me and started to laugh, and within a few seconds, the whole class was looking in my direction and joining in the laughter, like those hateful Martian robots in the Smash advert again. The test tubes on the shelves seemed to reverberate to their guffaws. Even the lovely Judy Carton was giggling, and for some reason she couldn't look straight at me. I figured the joke was on me, so I sat down very quickly, hoping for the mercy of an explanation from someone. Frankie Jones leaned forward on a stool and whispered, Timmy told everyone what you were doing in the bath last night, you dirty wee beast, you. But I was just playing with my... I started, and then the penny dropped. I hated Timothy Longsley. I knew I was supposed to be a blessed peacemaker, but I sat through the whole of chemistry pondering whether to use a conveniently lit Bunsen burner or some handy hydrochloric acid for revenge. Timothy chose to repeat this whole incident for weeks to anyone who would listen. Apparently it made for great hilarity in the minibus on the way to practice for the remainder of the rugger season. More worryingly, Judy Carton couldn't look me straight in the eye. I considered trying to explain the whole situation to her, but that would have been even more embarrassing. I was learning that although puns could be very clever, just like Noel Edmonds on Swap Shop, they could also become very annoying as well. So they could. So there you are. That's chapter 9 of Breadboy. Hope you enjoyed that. Let's say hello. We'll say to a few more people. And they put you in charge of a youth club. Yes, Alan's hard to believe. Yeah, after all that. Neve, love the Brucey impersonation. Good, glad you enjoyed that. Hi, Brendan. Hi, Susan. Hi, Ian Parsley and Francis McGrath and Susan Wilgar. Hello, my lovely cousin Laurie in Edinburgh, and Diane and Neil as well. Thanks very much for tuning in. Thank you. And I'll be back tomorrow night, same time, we'll be moving on to chapter 10 of Breadboy. Until then, stay safe, stay home, stay well, and stay positive.